Preparing for Communist China's Implosion. Commentary. Political, governmental, and social collapse in the People's Republic of China seems to be beginning. What could result is a PRC ruled by a modified Chinese Communist Party, a China without the CCP, or many Chinas as the country devolves into warlordism and separate states. This is occurring in the shadow of another reality, that parts of Communist China's society have continued to make great technological progress. Even when Imperial Russia collapsed in 1917, it came to a society which, in part, was suffering and frustrated, and, in part, was leading the world in some aspects of economic and industrial growth. The Great War became the catalyst for the final collapse of the Russian imperial government, and it was hardly the revolution it was later painted. Collapse often embodies the contradictory and simultaneous elements of significant growth and hope, alongside the frustration of certain social elements and the stifling paralysis of governmental structures. It often occurs when hopes have flourished and then been left unfulfilled or addressed too slowly. The final catalysts may vary in scope from the serious to the trivial. A vital, discreetly violent stage of a power struggle was unfolding by late September behind the bland, enigmatic facade of Zhongnanhai, the headquarters of the CCP, adjacent to the ancient forbidden city of Beijing, and behind the inscrutability of major officials. The delicacy of the various challenges to CCP leader Xi Jinping is a testament to the fears of all parties in the power struggle, each of whom knows that it is a balance between personal survival and the survival of the entire communist system, and even of the People's Liberation Army. People are dying or disappearing from within the elite of the communist system and the families of party officials. The latest trigger was the alleged murder of a young actor, Yu Minglong, on September 11th in Beijing. The unprecedented cover-up of the event, allegedly orchestrated by a senior party official, Kai Chi, has further polarized the power struggle, as well as acting as a trigger for public outrage in the streets. There have been many catalysts offering themselves up as the internal struggle plays out, but could this be the final, or near-final, one because of the street party connection? And in the streets, another life-and-death struggle is underway as unemployment, starvation, disillusionment, and anger cause protests and depredations of the population occurring inexorably every day throughout mainland China. There is no longer the possibility of hiding from the public the extensive loss of civilian lives. The disappearances have reached a statistically significant level. Military units have begun making bold moves to position themselves in favor of, or against, key factions within the party, including displays of force in cities around Beijing. The question in the short term is not whether the military can suppress the population, but rather whether various military and security organs or factions may instead fight each other. Therefore, it is a critical point in the battle for leadership of the party and, consequently, of the PRC, and hence the population and territory of mainland China, which will now almost certainly result in Xi Jinping being removed from power entirely. He has, for the past year, been increasingly isolated and removed from decision-making. This is finally being recognized by China watchers worldwide. But the process is still unfinished. Xi's demise or humiliation should be known by October, but the question still lingers as to whether the party itself will long survive thereafter. It is a process that showed clear indications by 2007 that collapse was likely by 2025. However, by the end of September, before the fourth plenum of the 20th Party Congress was scheduled to be held in October, Xi and his remaining loyalists were attempting to save themselves. If they succeeded in gathering some support from the military, then the outcome could be bloody and still jeopardize the ultimate fate of the CCP. National collapse is never neat, never appearing to be entirely rational, and always has a long history of painful, incremental degradation until the final steps appear, as if out of the dark. It occurs, eventually, with suddenness, whether through an outburst of revolution, a collapse of leadership, or, indeed, the precipitation of an external or internal military action. The collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1990–91, in hindsight, gave all the signs of developing systemic fracturing that we have now witnessed in China over the past few decades. Like the Russian Revolution that preceded it in 1917, the Soviet collapse came at a time when the strict culture of the Soviet purges had been eased, and perestroika and glasnost were causing Soviet citizens to become optimistic. Similarly, the French Revolution of the late 18th century, including the Bonapartist coup of November 9, 1799, led to the creation of the First French Empire on May 18, 1804, and entailed great contradictions that triggered factional infighting and street responses. Will General Zhang Youxia, current arbiter of power in Beijing, become a new Napoleon Bonaparte? There is nothing to suggest that the end of communist governance in China will be any less chaotic than the great collapses of governments over the past few hundred years, including the Iranian Revolution. It is important to stress that these events have rarely been revolutions in the classical, kinetic sense. They have most often been the result of the paralysis and collapse of governments that failed to adapt to changing circumstances. In the PRC, the collapse of Xi Jinping's governance could, as the party hopes, be part of a smooth transition to a new communist leader, enabling an even more peaceful handover than the one that occurred in the Soviet to Russian transition in 1990 to 91. But that cannot be guaranteed. Unlike in the USSR, late-stage Xi governance in the PRC is marked by massive starvation, homelessness, and unemployment, which may not be containable. There have been significant pressures on governments and traders around the world to ignore or rationalize the evolution of the process of change within the governance of China or the CCP. For this reason, the lack of international preparedness for the collapse of governance and the economy in the PRC has been allowed to occur. This means that economic planning and national security threat assessments, to the extent that they include the PRC, are outdated and fail to fully account for long-term scenarios. This may include chaos emanating from China, unpredictable Chinese actions amid the turmoil, and the ramifications for the post-China era. As things stood in late September, it seemed that the stage was set for the vice-chairman of the Central Military Commission, General Zhang Youxia, to play a key role in ensuring and stabilizing the transition of power away from Xi Jinping. There is some evidence that potential areas of dissent exist within the People's Liberation Army, which may disrupt a calm transition. At that point, if it is to come up at all, there exists a heightened opportunity for an attempted military assault on the Republic of China. However, such an attack would be highly problematic for the PRC, even with the full resources of the PLA. Of course, it would also be enormously damaging to the ROC and to Western access to Taiwan's computer chip industry. Attempts by the anti-Xi factions to restore economic stability to mainland China mean that they almost all endorse the pragmatism of former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping. However, this may be insufficient to facilitate the rapid reconstruction of mainland society without recognizing that a market economy needs to be market-driven, not output-driven. Deng and his successors believed that economic success was driven by industrial capacity and output, resulting in massive overproduction. This led to the collapse of commercial and industrial enterprises, as well as antagonism in global markets, which felt the burden of the Chinese dumping of goods at prices below the commercially viable level. The apparent fact that no plans are being discussed in Beijing to create a stable market economy in the PRC indicates that the recovery in China, if it is to occur in the medium term, will be halting. If that is so, then domestic unrest could escalate, along with a mass-scale exodus of Chinese people. The statement by King Louis XV of France just before the French Revolution, Après-moi, Le Deluge, has been interpreted as a nihilistic, uncaring statement by the French king that he was indifferent to what happened to his state after his death. Quite the contrary, the phrase could be said by Xi Jinping, "After me, the deluge. After me, chaos will reign." Louis XV and Xi were largely architects of their own downfall, but it would be unwise to think they did not care about their countries after their fall. They were true believers in their own way. We see it now in the reality of the battle for power between the factions seeking to retain or acquire power in China.